Power, I speak truths to power. A lion from the Zion. My words cutting iron. My life I run, I'm freezing guns. You block my way, you burn. You are Shamwa, your girl curve. I come from South Sudan. You grab my right, you take my mic. I'll tell you I was time. Freedom fighter, I'm on fire. Pen and paper, my desire. Tell the truth, confuse the liar. I'll take my right even higher. I'll throw my hands in the air. I salute if you can. I'll throw my hands in the air. I salute if you can. This is my power. This is my power. Power, power, my power. Power. This is my power. This is my power. Power, power. Away, Shamde, 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 away, Shamde. Hi, boy, hi, boy, hi, boy. We rock that I walk on Kentucky. She don't get more than one shot when I told her. She got wood, so let her go. She will eat, so you're like a doll. She will go away, she has it on the doll. Then you say you're crazy, well, I'll get your eyes and go and run. She do where I gotta take you and racist. It's matter of time, it's still no coexist. Do you know this? It's infinite, the belly of this. Do you know this? It's infinite, the belly of this. I'll throw my hands in the air. I salute if you can. I'll throw my hands in the air. I salute if you can. This is my power. This is my power. Power, power, my power. This is my power. This is my power. Power, power. Away, Shamde, away, Shamde, away, Shamde, and Shamde, away, Shamde, away, Shamde, away, Shamde, and Shamde. Hi, and everybody, hi, and everybody, hi, and everybody, hi, and everybody.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Thinking About. Thank you for joining us. I am delighted and really grateful that today's Thinking About is going to be shining a light on Refugee Week and in particular on South Sudan. So there's going to be the opportunity today to hear from two wonderful people. Later on, we'll be hearing from Emmanuel Jal. You just saw him performing in a music video with Nile Roger and Sheik. And we'll be sharing an interview that was recorded with Emmanuel in early May. And in just a moment, I'm going to introduce you to Connie, who's also going to be talking to us and reflecting and sharing some of her experiences. Just to say that it is also about you and you contributing as well. So as you're thinking about and listening to all that we're talking about today, if you've got any questions you want to ask, please do be posting those into the Q&A function. And later on, we will be getting on to answering as many of those as we can. Good. So I am delighted to introduce Connie. I'm going to have to turn to my notes. Hi, Connie. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to have this talk and this amazing conversation actually about something that's really dear to my heart. And I'm just hoping from this conversation we can inspire some people to go and find out a bit more about the refugee crisis happening, affecting about 70 million people in total worldwide.
Yeah, good, absolutely, and that is absolutely the hope. I think hope is going to be the emotion running through.
Hi everybody. Hi. Thanks for joining.
Brilliant. Now, without making you blush, I'm just going to do a brief introduction to you and all the amazing things that you've covered and done. So I have to refer to my notes over here so I don't miss anything out. Connie was born in Juba, now the capital city of the Republic of South Sudan, formerly a part of Sudan. In 1991, Sudan broke out into a civil war and Juba came under siege, resulting in Connie's family fleeing for refuge in the neighbouring country of Kenya. A year later, when Connie was aged 7, the family resettled in the UK as refugees. She is a graduate of King's College London University. She is currently the managing director of Sound School Music College, based in London, which is a diverse full-time music industry college for 16 to 19-year-olds interested in pursuing a career in modern music industry. So in a moment, Connie and I are going to talk, and then, as I say, after that, we're going to share an interview with Emmanuel Jal, who is Connie's friend and was a former child soldier. Great, so Connie, I thought, seeing as education is something that is so important to both of us,
yes,
we start with education, or what might in some ways be a re-education. And I know when you and I met a few weeks ago, it was in the aftermath of the tragic killing of George Floyd and the protests that happened after that, and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I bring that up in relation to what we're talking about today to do with refugees in South Sudan, because we had this conversation, didn't we, about this idea of this issue with there being the stereotypes, the misconceptions around refugees. And this sort of issue of there often being this singular narrative, this singular perspective, this singular representation, which just doesn't capture the reality. And so I just thought we'd start very much at that point of really sort of thinking about what are some of the myths. Now we've got this platform, what are some of the myths that you want to dispel?
That's a great question. I think to start off with, I'm so used to hearing refugees leave their home countries to take advantage of their host countries, whether it's things like the benefit system. People have this notion that refugees come here necessarily by choice to take liberty. And the first thing I just want to clarify, I'm a refugee, and we came here, my family came here as refugees, like most, if not all refugees, fleeing war, violence, conflict, or some form of persecution. And it's really, really important for people to remember that there are many individuals, like I said earlier, I think 70 million people at the moment in the world are fleeing some form of conflict in their home countries. And South Sudan, again, thank you so much for making that the focus of this conversation, is the third biggest crisis in the world. And the majority of these people are fleeing for their lives. They're looking for safer, better lives. And for that reason, you know, some of these people should be given an opportunity and a context should be brought into their story. And we shouldn't necessarily just listen to what the mainstream media says. And we should take the time to go out into these communities, these refugee communities in our own communities, and actually find out their stories and look at the stats subjectively, not just listen to some of our lovely right-wing press. So I just want people to also understand that there's this notion that a lot of refugees are, you know, these able young men that just come to steal jobs, etc., etc. The truth is, like in the case of South Sudan, the majority are women and children. Half of all refugees are children, and the majority, I think about 80 to 90%, are women. So these are the most vulnerable people in society, let alone in their own societies. And my family were given this opportunity. Usually within 3 to 7 years of being in a host country, and after you've been granted asylum, you've got the opportunity to give back to that community and that society. So refugees initially may cost something to those communities, but in the long run, they actually give a lot more back, whether it's through employment, whether it's through taxes, whether it's through adding to the culture. We have to understand that we are a global community and that nothing is ever black and white, that there are people that do take advantage of opportunities and the systems given to them. But as human beings, we have a collective responsibility to take care of each other, listen to each other's story, and also understand our history to why some of these conflicts are taking places, and that most of us have had a hand in it. So I think in the beginning it was mentioned that the war broke out in 91 in South Sudan, but that was actually the peak of the conflict, not long after I was born. So we were really, really fortunate as a family to get out of South Sudan through a refugee resettlement program. Not everybody has that opportunity. My mom fortunately had a skill set. She was a nurse that this country to this day benefits from. She works for the NHS, she retired, she went back. My dad fortunately had a skill set that the UK government at the time felt he may be an asset, so they gave him an opportunity, and there was 5 kids. They packed up 5 kids. There was many of us and brought us all to the UK. And because of that opportunity, I personally managed to get schooled. My siblings managed to get schooled, and I feel it's not for me to say, but I'm so grateful for that opportunity. I'm so grateful for that chance. I'm so grateful to be given an education, to be given the chance to not only develop something like Sound School in the UK, which is a college that has served thousands and thousands and thousands of young people here in the UK, but also take those skills back home to South Sudan. And that's my dream, to help where possible. And use this opportunity to talk to wonderful young people who actually care about this topic and want to hear this. So the little that I do have and I've experienced, even if I'm there nominally, I just want to let everybody know that there is no issue that's black and white, and what the media portrays is not the end all and be all. And where you can, do your homework, get to know some refugees. We don't all look a certain way and we don't all fit into one box.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. And I think that's a key point, because we go out into those communities, meet, talk, and I think that is really part of the re-education. It is taking that responsibility on for ourselves as well. And as you say, I think often, unfortunately, the representation is created by those that haven't actually lived that experience.
Yeah.
As you say, having that conversation with someone who has lived that experience.
And I just want to paint a picture that, especially when it comes to refugees, actual refugees, not economic migrants, refugees that are fleeing these wars. Most of these countries are absolutely beautiful. They have so much to offer. And that's another myth that I want to debunk. I've actually made some notes about some of the beautiful things in South Sudan that people may not know. But yes, we've had decades and decades and decades of war and conflict, and it's led to literally the 3rd biggest crisis on the globe. But these people are not leaving because they want to come to England to work at McDonald's or find a better job or steal from somebody. And I'm assuming that most of the people on here, have watched Marvel's Black Panther, Wakanda. Yeah, basically that's South Sudan in its natural beauty. It's sub-Saharan Africa. It's in East Central Africa. It's pretty landlocked. So when you see that scene of this beautiful, plush, forestry, amazing land, not the technology, obviously, and South Sudan is extremely war-torn, but there are regions that are so beautiful. The actual country not only has so much to offer in its landmass, in literally agriculture, animals. We've got lions, we've got 3 national parks, giraffes, elephants. We've got the biggest, well, I think the 3rd biggest in sub-Saharan Africa, oil reserve. It's a beautiful country. So imagine if we had peace, you would be coming there to holiday. You'd be coming there as tourists. So I don't want people to think that anyone would willingly leave such a beautiful, beautiful, potential, beautiful country with gold, diamonds, timber. We've got the Nile running through it. We've got hydroelectric power, potentially, if we stop fighting. There's so much to offer. The people alone, there's how many? I think about 60 different languages, over 60 different tribes. It's very rich in culture. It's very rich in resources. It's very rich in animals. It's very rich in history. This is truly a land of beauty, but unfortunately, because of our history, which a lot of different cultures, including the British, have influenced, South Sudan is a war zone. It's a war zone. And the Republic of South Sudan is a baby. It was just founded in 2011. So it's going to go through a period of uncertainty and issues before we can even reach a place where we can start to understand what democracy looks like for people back home and even start talking about peace. So let's help each other where we can and help rebuild the globe, not just a community in the UK.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that and painting that sort of picture of what South Sudan is like. Just picking up on a point you just mentioned about this idea of not willingly leaving these places, leaving somewhere like that. I just wanted to actually sort of share the United Nations definition of a refugee and just perhaps pick up a few points that comes up in that. So they define it as a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group,
yes,
is outside the country of his nationality and is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country, or who, not having a nationality and being outside the country of his former habitual residence as a result of such events, is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to return to it. And yeah, I mean, there was lots about that definition that struck me. I'm an English teacher as well, so I think I probably, get involved with definitions and want to sort of tease them out and think about the words. But I think one of the things that really struck me was that whole idea of being outside of your nationality. And I just wondered, to what extent do you feel outside of South Sudan, and how does that perhaps impact your own concept of self-identity?
So I was born in Sudan, what's now the Republic of South Sudan. I have a British passport that lets the whole entire globe know that I'm a British citizen. But in my British passport, it says I was born in Juba, which is now in the Republic of South Sudan. When I go back to South Sudan and they see this passport, they think you're British, but you're South Sudanese. And being in England, am I English enough? You might look at me and hear my accent. I say, okay, London. But there is no one identity for anybody. I genuinely believe that. I think we're multifaceted human beings and we're influenced by environment, our upbringing, our history, our experiences. But there is definitely, I feel for refugees, it's very complex. It is where do you belong? What do you call your home? Where does your loyalty and your allegiance lie? And for me personally, growing up in a community that's so war-torn and so a community of trauma, we've always had to speak about back home. Politics about back home was always at the forefront. You couldn't get away from being South Sudanese, and I'm really, really grateful for that. So intrinsically, my identity is South Sudanese. I'm British, I'm a British citizen, but I am South Sudanese. And I feel that the same way the UK will gain from everything positive I am or have as a person, South Sudan will and should also benefit from that. And hopefully in that, there is also a trade-off between the two countries. I have an uncle in the Isle of Wight he's an amazing consultant, and he's managed to link both one of the hospitals in the Isle of Wight with one of the hospitals in Juba and do an exchange program where he's so effective from the diaspora. He doesn't necessarily need to be in South Sudan, but the exchange program has meant that there are trained, able doctors from the West, from the Isle of Wight, who were able to go back home to South Sudan and implement change. So him as a South Sudanese man, you know, he identifies as a South Sudanese, he's a British, but he's always reminded us he's South Sudanese first. So it is a dual citizenship in heart and in mind. And it is very difficult. And I know for the community as well, we're very striking people in the sense that we stand out like beautiful aliens. You know, no matter what our accent looks like, you can tell when somebody's from South Sudan, especially based on the two major tribes that they speak of, the Dinkas and the Nuers. But just to mention, guys, this is a little clause, like there are so many different tribes in South Sudan. People, there's such a diversity of the way people look, but the two main tribes that people focus on happen to be the Dinka and the Nuer, who are the largest tribes in South Sudan and those with a lot more political power in the Republic of South Sudan. But yeah, you always have a sense of, do I quite belong? Am I British enough? And when I go back home, they see me as a foreigner. They see me as a threat because of my accent. I've been educated here. Am I going there to take their jobs? So the same things, the same discriminations I will face here as a refugee, I may even encounter back home, because they may see me as a threat to their livelihood and not necessarily as somebody who's coming to empower the nation. So yeah, there's always a sense of being outside, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hanging on to that lovely statement you say, where there's sort of dual citizenship in the heart and the mind. And I suppose it comes down to very much how we just reconcile that sense of our own, our own identity. Absolutely. The other thing that struck me about that, reading it as well, was this whole idea that it says a sort of a well-founded fear of being persecuted. And I just sort of wondered, you know, how much of that sense or that memory of fear remains, or is it something that I suppose combined with sort of hope and empowerment reconciles itself, or is that a sense that fear is present?
I think that's, if I was to break it up into two, there's me personally and my experience, and then there's the majority of my community, the South Sudanese community internationally, not just in Africa, not just in South Sudan. They've experienced a lot of trauma, and that trauma doesn't just go away. I personally believe that trauma can be inherited, and fear is truly the root of all evil. And most of these people are used to persecution, used to violence, used to being in conditions of survival. And this is a state that travels with you to different countries. And I do know that there are many mental health issues that the South Sudanese community is battling with, whether it's alcoholism. There are many factors that come from what they've been through, let alone the fear of having a secure base and being given asylum in a foreign country and having the chance to rebuild your life and potentially having all of that taken away. And there's the fear of the loved ones still back home. And there's the fear of what you've left back home, you know, your family land, your ancestry. Fear is something that's not only intrinsic to human nature, but for people who come from trauma, for people who lived all their lives in war, unknown war, that's not something we take lightly. And what I've been seeing a lot of, especially since during lockdown, there are many South Sudanese young people that are using this opportunity to connect again and are forming, you know, online groups and Instagram lives, for example, denials on a Friday, where they're bringing these South Sudanese issues to the forefront. They're having these conversations about the community, good and bad, and they're giving people an opportunity to actually address things like depression, conflict, and talk about, you know, empower each other, not just talk about the negatives. We've recently celebrated a young man from South Sudan. I think he's the first person to graduate from Harvard. I've recently discovered that we have a South Sudanese who's a gamer, and he's making moves in the industry, and his mum bought his first laptop in the camp, in a refugee camp, because he had a dream, and his mum worked for a year, I think, sewing things, and bought him a laptop for like $300. And he's now this successful young man that's not only made history for South Sudan, but it really has empowered the community and given us all hope. And we all know that greatness is born from a dark place. You can use that to be bitter, you can use it to be better. So when I'm seeing young men like that, not just the greats like the Luol Dengs, the Manute Bowles, the basketball player and the athletes, but actually young South Sudanese who are breaking into different sectors, not just sports, music, and, you know, big up to Emmanuel Jal, of course, because he's more than just music. It really does give you hope, and it shows that you can literally turn lemons into lemonade. So fear is not where we stay. Fear may be where we come from, but we use that to create a very different reality and show the world that although we start on a minus, it's very possible to end up on a plus and not just impact yourself, your family, your community, but the world. And these young South Sudanese G's are doing that all the time.
Yeah, no, amazing, absolutely. I think that line you just said, greatness is born out of darkness, is probably a really great way to introduce Emmanuel, because he's most certainly that. And we're going to share in just a moment his interview. I had the pleasure of welcoming him to Dulwich College at the beginning of last year, and he came to speak to our Year 10 students. And it was interesting thinking about the whole idea of fear. I remember he said that understand that fear is the beginning of knowledge and wisdom. And I just thought, again, that's that way of having lived with that sense of fear and turning it into something that somehow creates that sense of experience and knowledge and wisdom for how you go on. And I thought that was such a powerful, brilliant message that I've sort of got written down in front of my teacher planner. I sort of read that. So I think that was great. So yes, so what we're going to do now is we are going to share a video, an interview that I did with Emmanuel. Before we do that, Connie, could you just introduce him for us from sort of your perspective, knowing him as a friend?
Emmanuel is absolutely interesting in many ways. He's a wonderful, wonderful, special human being. And anybody you don't even have to know him. I think anybody who's had the pleasure to probably be in a room with him for more than 10 minutes will kind of gauge his spirit. I don't want to really go so much into his bio. I hope most of you already know that he was a former child soldier, and he literally uses his gift as I see it. He's got this uncanny ability to tell stories, whether it's through his rapping, whether it's through his performance on stage, but he's electrifying, he's charismatic. He's honestly given me a chance of a lifetime to tour with him and learn from him. And he's somebody who just believes in using his experience to better humanity, to better, and he does yoga. What can I say? He does yoga. He's a very spiritual guy. He watches what he eats, but he's very cheeky and can be really, really funny. He's a very wholesome guy. He finds humor in everything. And as you're going to see, I think he has a great way of telling stories. And for those of you who will get the chance, it's really worth seeing him live. And I'm not just saying that because I perform with him. He's honestly a wonderful, wonderful performer and one heck of a personality.
It's brilliant. That's a perfect introduction. Okay, so all being well, here is an interview recorded with Emmanuel back in May. Here we are. Great. Hi, Emmanuel. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, I'm really
Amazing. I like your artwork at the back. It looked like an art piece.
A few things, yeah. My collections from around the world are sitting behind me. I've got the world behind me.
That's so cool.
Great. Well, it's really great to see you. We obviously had the pleasure at Dulwich College of introducing you to school last year to come and talk to some of our students. For those that didn't get to meet you then, yeah, what would you like them to know about you before we begin chatting?
Well, I'm just a normal human being who's working to make a difference in himself first, like working in myself. And I have my purpose, which is to spread act of kindness, do Creator's will, be part of a solution where I can contribute to restore balance. And also at the same time, I have my vision, which is to share my experiences for social emotional learning to create conscious global awakening. And the foundation of what made me share my story or my experiences, the early of it began on my lowest point. So being born in a war-torn country and we lost everything, what I call home, seeing it disappeared. All my aunties were taken by that war. My mother was taken by that war. And I became a refugee now for, let's say, for like 32 years. I've been from one place to another. In that journey, I'll probably say I died many times. I became a child soldier. Then living that life, now I'm a recording artist, an entrepreneur, and a life performer coach. So there's a lot of things that is happening in my life right now. So, yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. So you're obviously referring to the Sudanese civil war that went on. And I think that was what was so inspirational when you came in to speak to students. I know how many of them, I think you were quite overwhelmed, you know, afterwards, how many of them I think tweeted and started to follow your page, which is amazing. You talked just then about the idea that you died many times, which also implies that you were then reborn after that, as such. So what, how did you do that as such? I'm sure each time was maybe different, but how do you go from a place which is, as you say, so low and try and turn that into something that means you can be almost reborn, that you can go on? Can you maybe, yeah, think about one of those times and how you did that?
Anytime you give up, you died, because that's how I look at it. Because the future, and I'll explain. When we were in Ethiopia, I'll probably explain 3 spots in which I died that I would call probably died. There's one part, one of our journey where we walked, and that journey was so tiring. We didn't have enough food. And as we were walking, what was cutting me in my heart that was pushing me is, I want to go to school. So I would dream, seeing myself going to school. And that made me say, I'm not gonna stay behind. I'm gonna go. And I'll hear my mother's voice telling me, keep going, my son. You're going to learn how to make the things you want to make. You're gonna learn how to fly a plane. You're going to learn how to make biscuits, because I want to know how to make biscuits. Because I don't know what the biscuits are, where they're made in the factory, because as a kid, I love biscuits. And so, but that gave me a motivation. I remember this one tiring journey where some kids collapsed and nobody can carry them. And they're left there. And my foot cracked, you know, like when you walk until you see like your foot, you know, we walk on a thorny ground. And it was painful, but after a while, our feet get used to the thorny ground. Now we walk on rocky, on harsh ground. The grass, our feet become stronger. But the feet start cracking. Now we got used to that. So that's another pain. But now, there's a type of walking that your entire body becomes so painful that it turns sweet. And in this journey, I remember walking one time where my entire body hurts. And you do your prayers, you know, to give you the next notch to move. And one thing I learned from that journey is, when you do your best, when nothing, you're not sure, when you do your best to your best ability, but your body cannot take it, then angels will carry you. Because I remember at this point when I was walking, and I cannot remember what happened. I just fell down. But when I fell, it's like God carried me. That's what I'll say. Or an angel carried me. I felt being carried. I'm collapsing inside. I don't know, I'm done. And so we arrive in this place, new place. And this is a strange place. I don't know where it is. And I came back to my senses. Another kid was next to me and looking at me and he said, Jal. And I said, where are we? And he said, you're lucky, man. A stranger carried you. Somebody just carried you, but we don't know who they are. And they left you here. And so, to me, that one gave me faith and made me say, okay, I'll always do my best. But I would say that I died there. To me, I would say I died, because if that person would have not picked me, then who else? Another part of my journey, which I died, was that I'm responsible for, is there was a place where we were overwhelmed by as children. One kid started asking questions, because you see like 6, 7 years old burying their own dead. Somebody died. We dig our own graves. We bury our own dead. Just imagine that. One kid one morning started asking questions, you know, which was the same question that I asked. But that night, it became intense. He started asking, where is my mom? Where's my dad? Why are we here? Who made the bag of maize? Who are these white people feeding us? Why are we here? God, what have we done to suffer like this as children? You know, there's a little kid asking tough questions at night, deep questions. None of us could not answer. In the morning, that morning, the kid had a robe on his hand. And all of us were watching. Some were lying down, some were seated, and some were standing. We're just watching him. He climbed the tree. And he tied the rope on the tree. Then he tied it in his neck. And he jumped. Now, his pictures is still in my head right now. I can see we did nothing. He took his life. When I say I died many times, I'm trying to, I don't want to lie to people to say, hey, my journey was easy. I'm this guy who went through all this difficult stuff. You know, the one that gave me the strongest beliefs that made me to say, from now on, I am going to stay alive and I'm not going to end my life, was the escape journey where I became a child soldier and we planned an escape. But this escape, we were so thirsty. There's no water. We wake up in the morning, and if there's grass, we time the dew, and we wipe our hand on the grass and lick it several times. That became our water for that journey. Now in this journey, my little toe, my left toe here, it was cut. And it kept hurting me. Every time I step on the smooth ground, we cannot walk on clean paths because in clean path there are minefields. So we have to walk on rough ground to skip, and it's hurting my foot. Now there's a child soldier who's also injured and he was being carried and people were tired of him. So they put him on the tree. And he was told, we're going to come and pick him. 50 meters as I walk, and as everybody goes. He had a G3, you know, it's the type of a gun. He cocked it and he put it in his chin and he fired the bullet and he collapsed. His skull was open and you could see the brain pieces dropping down. He planted a seed in my head, and as I was moving in my journey, as my feet hurt, why don't you do like him? So I had to wrestle with it. And how did I wrestle this? I am going to stay alive because I want to see my brothers and sisters. I want to stay alive because I want to tell this story. I'm going to stay alive because I know I'm going to go to school one day. I still want to go to school. I'm a child soldier, I have a gun, but I still want to go to school. So I still have the belief. And so that kept me going, those little tiny beliefs, you know, visualizing things. Every little tiny belief you have will take you to a certain level.
Yes.
I would have done it then, but now I had to fight with a thought that had a pattern. You know, what was driving me? Why do I want to go to school? I had a belief that I'm going to be a part of a solution. And that's I wanted to stay alive, but this time, at this journey, at this point, at one part, I look at my future. It was black. There's nothing. I could not see anything. The pain of my foot was worse. I look at my past. It's ugly. The good memories disappeared. And I look at my presence, our numbers were reducing. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, my foot is paining. And that thought came to me, do like how that kid did it. And then I took my gun. I tried to cock it with my hand. I didn't have the energy. And then I looked and I used my foot. I cocked it with my foot because my foot had a stronger energy. And then I looked, closed my eyes, and I fired the bullet. Now, the bullet failed. Now, the bullet failed. Sometimes I would imagine, what about if it came out? If that bullet would have come out, I'm just wondering what would happen if that bullet came out. This is it. I'm not going to do this again. Because the next time I'll do it, it will be for real. So I'd say, this is it, I mean, this is it now. I can remember 3 attempts of my life, and this is the one. And so, and I started saying the belief statement over and over and over, until I was possessed by it. And then I took the first step of my foot. The pain was there, but there is living in my head. And then the energy started creating, something started happening. The chemical reaction that took place in my body, it created a painkiller. So and that's what I shared when I came to the school, asking each and every kid is, what is courage? Courage is the force, the power inside us that help us overcome fear. And how can we gain courage? For you to gain courage, you must have something you believe in. Now, this journey of mine, this lowest point, because in life, it's like a wave, you know? You go down. People are more, you see, there are three things people are interested in. Suffering, everybody suffer. But people are interested in the struggle, the process, because when you're suffering, what are you doing there? Now, when you object and fight back, that is called struggle, because you're doing something about it. So this thing is killing you, you do this way. This thing is killing you, you're doing it, look like you're finding a way, and people are interested in that journey. And then when you begin to get away, to get to the step of normalness, that's what people are interested in, success. It's in our life. Every day we have a success and we have a failure. Every day, everybody has. But there's the big one.
Yeah. I know what you about there was this idea of we have this inner voice, don't we, that is kind of constantly talking to us. And I think, you know, sometimes that inner voice can be full of doubt, and sometimes that inner voice can almost battle against us. But of course, it's the idea that, I suppose, doing those belief statements, it's almost like we have to help train that inner voice a little bit for those moments when we are in struggle, in that moment of kind of, you know, fight or flight. I mean, can you think about going back to those, you know, you just sort of describe those three low points for you, that, you know, what would that voice have said to you to try and take you out of that? You know, how can we, what sort of things can we say to ourselves perhaps to help, as I say, almost train an inner voice to be kind to ourselves, to help us in those moments of low, when that doubt unfortunately enters our minds a little bit?
So goodness, positive voice is in us, and the negative voice is in us. What I look at it is, our brain is built to look for negativity. Whether we like it or not, it will do it. It's our responsibility to expose ourselves to positive content. So when you wake up every day, if you haven't taken positive content, you haven't done certain routine to take care of your well-being, what's going to happen? The negative part of your mind will govern your life. And that's what they do. But how can you speed the process in which you can rewire your brain? For example, when you're traumatized, your courage is taken away from you. Your confidence is taken from you. Your free will, like you're no longer now you're being controlled by the fear and the stories of the past and the future. You know, when your future, your present, and the past collide negatively, it crushes you, it can make you lose hope. And so, great thing is, we can rewire our brain. And also we can awaken wisdom that has been buried deep beneath our old brain when we have activities.
And so is the idea, I suppose, that we have to, this has to become a habit for us, that you know, to start to think about the belief statements you talked about, again, is something we continue to share with our pupils, and the idea that it's about not waiting for the struggle to come, to start actually doing those belief statements almost every day, to start to just really kind of nurture your mind, love yourself every day, so that actually when those difficult moments come, that you sort of prepared yourself almost, that it's sort of like you managed to become stronger in that ability to take yourself out of that dark place, or to find that courage in that moment when you think it's leaving you. So this idea that this should become a habit for us to almost every day say something positive to ourselves, or even to be a good friend, say something positive to somebody else. You sort of suggesting that almost, this has to become a habit, a practice for us almost, rather than just waiting until it's necessary.
If it's not in you, it will not come out. We will know ourselves. We only know ourselves at our lowest point and at the highest point. At the lowest point, then you'll know, who am I really? This situation is teaching us. The people who have not, those who don't know their purpose, because we don't know how the future is going to look like right now. We don't know if things are going to be the same. Those one will be troubled because they have not surrendered. Because what is purpose? Purpose is the conscious awakening of self, where you come to a realization. The world does not revolve around you, but around everything. And in that realization, you surrender yourself to a cause greater than you, where you contribute to restore balance, give without expecting anything in return. Now, your purpose, when you're able to surrender, then you have peace of mind and joy. The most valuable thing I have right now, that there is no price tag on it. I cannot sell it. Like if you tell me, we're all experiencing it differently. Others are becoming creative, others are upset, others cannot believe it, but some still think it's going to go away tomorrow. It's going to go away tomorrow. That is hope. The most important thing is battles are won in preparation. Now we're going through this, but there's what is called trauma. It's not showing itself now, but it will show itself later. There are people who lost their businesses. There are people now who are planning to divorce. There are people who lost their loved ones. There are people who lost their friendships. There are so many things that are happening right now. Those who know their purpose will persist and will live through this.
Yeah. So it's almost the idea that we have to find our sense of purpose. And I suppose that's something for us to say to people, to continue to reflect on what that is, but to almost remember that often our sense of purpose is greater than ourselves, that to almost think about that purpose and the way you can make that purpose be a part of something bigger or part of something that's kind of collaborative as well is important for them to think about. That I suppose a sense of your own self-purpose is not where you're just saying that kind of joy is found. So it'd be good. I think this time that we're in, as you say, is a time of uncertainty. We don't know what the future looks like, but I hope it's giving people time to reflect a little bit. And I think that's a really great message for our people, to just spend a bit of time reflecting on what their purpose is, on what their beliefs are, those belief statements, but also how their individual purpose moves into something bigger, something greater than they are.
You nailed it.
Okay, we're just going to leave that up on the screen a little bit longer for you to be reading a few of those points that are there. Just a reminder as well, in just a moment, we're going to move to our question and answer phase. So please do keep using the Q&A function on your screen to just pose any questions that you would like to ask as well, okay? Do also, if you have a chance at the end of this talk, do log on to Emmanuel's website, Grow Africa, and where you can find out a little bit more about him and the work that he's still doing at the moment. Okay, great. A lot there. It was amazing to do that interview with him, in particular, as I said, it was back in early May in the sort of early phases of lockdown. Lots to talk about, Connie, but we're gonna, as I say, I want to give lots of time to Q&A as well. I think there were a couple of things that really struck me. One of them, again, is something I've written down, is when Emmanuel says purpose is the conscious awakening of self. I think we should all just let that sort of, sink in to that whole idea and that sense of purpose and seeking that purpose. I just wondered do you have belief statements? Connie, just unmute yourself, sorry.
Sorry guys, can you hear me now? Yeah, no, I was really into that. And Emmanuel, funnily enough, was one of those people that really influenced me into forming my own mantra and putting down my mission, my vision, and my personal statement. Yes, I definitely have a belief statement. I actually have an I am affirmation that I say every day to myself. The wonders of the iPhone. The first thing I do when I wake up is reach for my phone. So I've kind of taught myself now to go into my notes and go through my I am affirmations. And I think one of those affirmations is about being a powerful creator in your own right, and knowing that you do have the power to make those changes in your life. And the way to do that, for me anyways, is through the conscious daily habits that you have. So the little things that you can do, like waking up and not necessarily going on your Instagram and checking for likes, but taking the time out to be grateful for waking up, and the little things that you do have definitely make a difference into shaping who you are as a person, and to just being a better human being generally. Every day is a fight, every day is a struggle. As Emmanuel pointed out, we all come from some form of trauma, or we'll experience it at some point in our lives. So I definitely believe that the same way we're obsessed about being beautiful or going to the gym and being physically fit, it's more important to be emotionally and mentally and spiritually strong. It all feeds into each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I hope everyone watching, when this is over, goes and starts to maybe think about writing some of those belief statements.
Yeah.
Share with your friends who maybe weren't here to write those belief statements, because I think that's so true about finding that sort of inner purpose and what that purpose means in you know, for each other as well. You referenced community earlier. You know, it's just so important, and we've all reflected on a lot over the last few months. There was something else that really struck me, actually. Obviously, he says some wonderful and amazing things, but one of them was just, kind of when he was talking, I was connecting to myself as a child. There's so much, obviously, of Emmanuel's story for me as you're listening that is so hard to imagine, you know, sort of, you know, that age being taken to be a child soldier. But he talks about this idea of he says, you know, I wanted to make biscuits. And this sort of sense of actually, you know, what was it that sort of, you know, kept him going in some ways. And it just made me think about that sort of beautiful childhood sort of wonder and imagination. And, you know, I was thinking mine was paper. When I was a child, I wanted to know how to make paper. And it wasn't because I wanted paper, it was because I loved reading and I wanted to write a book. And so as a child, I thought, well, if I'm going to read and write a book, then I've got to know how to make the paper to write to read it from. And there is a sense that actually, listening to him talking just then made me really sort of reflect and remember on that whole idea of actually that sort of childhood curiosity and wonder and hope really does kind of remain with you and really sort of drives you on. And him remembering that he wanted to make biscuits because he'd eaten these biscuits and he wanted to be able to keep eating them, just really struck me. And again, I just wondered, do you have a biscuit equivalent?
Yes, I think my biscuit equivalent has to be drawings. I was obsessed with drawing things and watching cartoons and hoping and praying that one day they're going to come to life and I'd be able to tell my stories through them and have a friend that I could create and speak to. So I think it's the notion of creating my own reality and my own world, and just imagination and just having no boundaries and restrictions. The cartoons can come to life and basically do whatever I ask them to, and we'll have fun and always play.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, I think it's where then that merges, that imagination and reality merges, and both help us kind of go on and help us kind of keep existing.
I think I also didn't have many toys to play with, so that was definitely an outlet.
Absolutely. Great. I'm conscious of time. I'm conscious of giving a lot of time over to everyone watching. And so I think we're moving to our question and answer or Q&A phase now. Before we do that, so Connie's going to stay with us to help answer some of those questions. I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce someone else who is Tanya. Again, I'm going to have to refer to my notes because there's so many wonderful things to tell you about Tanya before she joins us. So Tanya was born in the UK where she began her career in TV. She worked as a producer on a range of documentaries and entertainment shows for national television. and Tanya then shifted her focus to specialist educational programmes. In 2008, she became head of productions for film and education, overseeing production of over 60 short aspirational films for and about schools. Through her experience, she gained a valuable insight into the enormous benefits of a creative learning approach, especially among refugee children. And with her sister, she founded My Start, a creative arts project for Goa Africa, a charity which provides education and training for those affected by conflict in East Africa. It was at this juncture that she met Emmanuel Jal in 2011 and now manages all aspects of his work in entertainment, the arts and education. One of their many highlights, despite hugely challenging circumstances, was creating the first of its kind peace concert and gala dinner in South Sudan for International Peace Day with legendary hip hop artist Run DMC and former Vice President Dr. Riek Machar. So, Tanya, welcome to you as well.
Hi everyone. Hi.
Hello. At this point, I'm going to step aside into the hand over to far more capable hands of two of our SSLP students. So I will also welcome Nia and Gabriel to the panel as well.
Hi, thank you to Ms. Whittington and Connie and Tanya and everyone for being here and for the great questions that are coming through. So just continue to send those. So I guess this question is both for Tanya and Connie. And just earlier on, you were discussing the UN definition of a refugee and that whole idea of being outside of a nationality. And so, you know, in light of that, I was just wondering how you would define home and what home, you know, means to you.
Well, for me, home is where the heart is. Let's start, as corny as that is, home is where the heart is. And I guess the notion of having a dual citizenship, not just on paper, but in my larger context, I grew up in the UK. I grew up in London. I'm comfortable in London. I feel safe in London. My friends and my family are in London. This is home to me. This is definitely home to me. But when I go back to South Sudan, and even now as a South Sudanese in London, that's also my home. That's where I was born. Although it's war-torn, doesn't mean I've abandoned it or I don't see it as something precious or a big part of who I am. So both are, this is home, but South Sudan is also my home and it's my heart. And I do believe you can love more than one thing at a time.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Tanya, did you?
I mean, I'm lucky. I do live in the UK, but I mean, listening to what Emmanuel's been through, and obviously having worked and knowing him so well, you know, he became a Canadian citizen only last year. So since you saw those, you know, those clips of him at 7 years old, from that time onwards, he has never really been able to call a place home. And even up until the point where he got his citizenship, you never actually trust that the process is going to benefit you, because up until that point, the process has always not benefited you. So yeah, the day it came through, I mean, it was so emotional. And I think that, you know, for people that finally get to call a place called home after, I mean, for Emmanuel, he's now 40 years old. It's, you know, 32 years. It was a huge relief. I mean, he always said he didn't care, that home was where the heart is, wherever he was. But having that recognition and that safety and that security, because he didn't have it. We used to have countless problems with visas. Always, he had 2 businesses in the country. He employed Canadians. No one ever gave him a chance. So
in the airports as well, he always used to get stopped and frisked and getting coffee with immigration. He's been through it.
Connie and I have been on the road a lot. So we because I'm his manager and Connie sings with Emmanuel, we've been on the road a lot. So, you know, all the time we encounter issues, all the time. So she knows more than anyone.
Very happy for him. He's finally got a respite and a breather.
Thank you for that. What struck me about both of you when you Emmanuel was interviewing you, Connie, is you both talked about just the desire for education and just simply that. And like you've all then, My Start with Tanya and Connie in Sound School and Emmanuel with Goa Africa, all gone on to contribute and educate people. And to you, why do you think that is? And why do you think that desire for education is so important for you?
For me personally, I just want to firstly kind of paint a picture of education. It doesn't necessarily have to mean mainstream or academia as we know it. For me, education is the opportunity to gain knowledge, and through knowledge, you gain some form of empowerment. So even if you just think about South Sudan, it's got one of the most horrendous rates of literacy. About only, I think, 16% of women are literate in South Sudan, and about 40% of men. Now, the country in itself has got, these women don't really have access to healthcare. Even they die at childbirth because of basic things that, if we were aware of, could really, really change their lives. If they had access to education, if they had access to certain pieces of knowledge, which can help them with sanitation, hygiene, which can help them with even knowing their rights as a human citizen, and things, child marriages. We know that the highest rate of child marriages happen to girls that have not been educated. So I feel education is a human right. It's a basic human right. It doesn't just allow you to succeed or function in your own community, let alone internationally and steal jobs. Is something that can really, really help a community, help a mother, help a child, and help a country, let alone the nation. So I don't take it lightly in any way, shape, or form. I think a lot of the human rights violations that we see, the abuses that women and children face, the lack of infrastructure, governance, you name it, is because there isn't enough education, there isn't enough knowledge, there isn't enough sharing of knowledge and experience. So education is something that will always be close to my heart, and not just academia.
And Tanya, what about you? Because my start is very much that like creative education, people that otherwise may not have that opportunity. What about you and education for you?
Yeah, well, we work in Kakuma Refugee Camp, which is in northwest Kenya on the border of South Sudan and Kenya. So it's where a lot of refugees have come in from South Sudan. And, you know, we take creative well-being and, you know, even PE and physical exercise, those types of activities outside the sort of basic English and maths in our education so seriously. And it's funny that when you think about refugees and you think, well, actually, you know, English and maths is the first things that they should be learning about. Well, of course, the key pillars of education are really important, but creative well-being, as we've discovered, is so important, because when you've got young people who've been out of mainstream education, they've experienced trauma, they've experienced pain, it's really hard to get them to engage in learning, let alone like the rudimentary sort of basics. So I think that, you know, we've been thrilled to be able to support that in the refugee camp through art and film workshops. Emmanuel's charity, Gwar Africa, has encompassed leadership programs. So he now undertakes a leadership course every year. And to have a role model like Emmanuel, you know, promoting creative well-being in the camp is so important, because they're seeing someone for the first time that's actually exactly, you know, someone from their community that's been through something similar. And you know, he even brings in sort of meditation practices, dance practices, yoga practices, positive mindset. And what it does is it creates independent thinking. We've also got in the audience someone called Robin Scheuer, who's the director of Windle Trust, who provide all the education in Kakuma, and we've partnered with them to do vocational training. And that's really important too, because not every student's going to go on and do higher education sort of degrees and masters. To be able to offer vocational training skills is really, really key.
Yeah, it genuinely just increases your chance of survival in a place like South Sudan. You know, it all starts with the mothers, as they say. You know, if a mother is educated, the child has, I guess, a 50% chance of survival. So education, even the economy benefits from that. It's something that if we all have an opportunity to share the little that we know as individuals and impart that even to one person, let alone set up a system that feeds many, it really will make a difference to a nation.
Just kind of like following on Tanya's point about the importance of the creative arts, I just wanted to ask Connie, like obviously for you and Emmanuel, music has been such a fundamental part of your story and your journey. And I was just kind of wondering like why you believe that the creative arts is such an integral way to engage people and convey a message.
I feel it serves many purposes. Being creative, first of all, it's a form of therapy, not just for us creators. It's a chance to not just express ourselves in creative ways, but it's a chance to relive some of those traumas, not just our own stories, but other people's stories. And Emmanuel's the first to advocate the power of sharing stories and experiences to influence change. I think it's very healing. It's very therapeutic. It's something that can be very personal, but can also be very, very objective. You can tell other people's story. People can relate to your own story without necessarily disclosing their own. So I think it's a very, very, very powerful tool to connect people and for people to deal with some of those hard to reach topics, issues that they may have that's not necessarily comfortable to talk about. I just feel when you free the mind and you free the heart and you free the emotions, then you're able to create. You're able to create a better community, a better person, a better society, and have tangible outcomes. But yeah, I feel like the arts is a great form of therapy and information sharing and awareness building.
Emmanuel always says that he actually feels that it physically creates space in his brain.
It does. Yeah.
Something like this, he goes, I feel like it actually creates a bubble in my brain. And then sort of the stress, it relieves the stress, it brings in sort of different nuanced thinking, you know, not such a structured way of A to B to C, you know, it's got lots of nuances. And so, yeah, and creative patterns. So that's what he loves.
It really touches on what Tanya said, and you picked up on this, Nia. Not everybody's had the opportunity to have formal education, let alone primary, secondary. So it's just a way of acknowledging that we're all different. We all think differently, and it gives people the space to be different and to still be accepted and to still realize their own potential. So I'm definitely a massive advocate for all types of arts, especially music, of course. But I do think that it has a place in this world, whether it's vocational studies, whether it's just like music, film, there's a place for all of that, as well as academia.
Thank you so much for that.
A really good question from Sophia in the audience. The idea of being grateful has kind of come up a bit. What are your thoughts on people coming to expect eternal gratitude from refugees? Do you think this puts refugees into infinite debt, or do you think it's justified? And just opinions on that.
We're all refugees. We're global citizens. All of us are refugees. If we all look at the story and the history of the United Kingdom, Great Britain, we all came from somewhere, except maybe the Celts. That's debatable. But we are, once upon a time, the earth was Pangea. It was one continent. So I think if we stop looking at those man-made lines and actually start, I know there has to be some practicalities here and we have to be pragmatic that we do live in the 21st century and politics is important and, you know, boundaries are very important and systems have to be in place. All of that is really, really important. But I think the notion of saying, does somebody have to be indebted? I don't believe so. I think let's reframe that and say that we all have a collective duty to make this world a better place, whether it's the environment, climate change, whether it's our own behavior and attitude towards our mum and dad, let alone our neighbors. I think we all have a collective responsibility to make this world better. And as technology is happening and democracy in the Western sense is spreading around the world, people are basically drawing up more and more lines. And if I see no evil and hear no evil, it has nothing to do with me. Or if I see it too much on TV, I become desensitized and it doesn't mean anything because it's not me that's being affected or it's not my immediate family. I think we need to go back to an element of spirituality, which Emmanuel Jal really pushes, and remind ourselves that it's important to have empathy, not just empathy, but to do something. And doing something doesn't necessarily mean you have to stand up and shout at the top of your voice. It could be the smallest things. So I believe we're all indebted to each other. I think where you can help, if you can help, which means even Googling certain facts and understanding things in context, not just taking what the press or a friend or mum and dad believes, and actually finding out the truth behind something and having a context before you have an opinion, will make a difference to the world that we live in.
Thank you. Tanya, any comments?
I don't feel like the refugees should be indebted. I feel like we owe them actually a great debt, because you know, when you think there's 80 million people that are displaced and are all under the bracket of refugees, and human resources are more valuable than gold or diamond, any other sort of mineral on this planet, human beings are the greatest resource we have, then we should be ashamed that we're not utilizing that power, that these people are just sitting in camps or in places where they can't really work and give back. So actually, no, the debt is on us, really. That's how I think of it.
We just have another question here from Maria, and there's from both you and Emmanuel, there's been this kind of constant referencing to trauma, and she was kind of wondering, you know, how sometimes, you know, fear can hold us back, and what distinguishes fear from being constructive or destructive. Like, what's that distinguishing factor that, you know, means that fear either holds you back or it pushes you to
That's a great question, and it's a very, very complex one to answer because it's very unique to everybody. I think all of us experience fear in many, many different contexts. Even anxiety, you know, it can be seen as a form of fear. But then we also have a choice where we can all be anxious to have this conversation, but at what point do we say we're excited to have this conversation and see the positives in what this conversation is actually potentially doing to the 40 or 50 people that may be streaming this, and the hundreds and thousands and millions potentially that could see after. I think fear is human nature. There's a famous quote, feel the fear and do it anyways. It's I genuinely believe it's a part of our DNA, just like this world is good and bad. And it's about acknowledging that fear, not hiding it, literally looking it in the eyes and seeing what is it that I can change, like tangibly change in this situation, or what is it that I can do irrespective of this fear, and almost practicing your way to coping better, because it never really goes away. It never really goes away. But fear is a human state, and you just have to learn to beat it up every single day through the daily rituals and practices you have.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Tanya, any thoughts?
I don't know if this answers the question, but it's quite a funny sort of parallel. Emmanuel and I obviously have grown up in completely different environments, and he's grown up in survival state the whole time, and I've grown up in safety, so I'm always thinking sort of about the long-term solutions and trying to be a lot calmer and sort of like, okay, how can we plan for this? And I don't actually really, I'm not living my day-to-day in sort of a sense of sort of that actually things could shift very quickly. So, if we're on the flight and it starts getting bumpy, I'm like, oh my God, we're going to crash. And then he just looks at me like, what are you talking about, Tanya? Calm down. And our approaches are very different. So, I mean, what I think is quite funny is that he always has, he's like, what is the biggest fear? And I'm like, that we could fail. And he's like, well, yeah, we could fail and something bad could happen. But then that also opens up to a whole infinite source of possibilities. So he's always saying, well, even if the worst case, he's already got the worst case scenario in his head of what could happen on a daily basis, which I don't have. And so as a result, he's always saying the different options, the different ways in which you can bend and be adaptable and be resilient. And there I am, just, freaking out, thinking that if it all fails, I mean, that's the end, we're doomed. So I don't know, I think sometimes when you've lived in that kind of environment, actually, you're a lot more resourceful, you're a lot more adaptable, you can bend and kind of change to life circumstances a lot better. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think we could learn a lot from people that have been through those types of experiences.
I mean, my granddad's always said to me that your own fear of failure is like your greatest enemy. So, yeah.
Exactly. There's absolutely 0 points. You've got to live in the moment. So, yeah, live in the moment.
Thank you. Another one, I guess, on that note of kind of adapting and adaptation. Connie, for you, and I guess Tanya speaking for possibly Emmanuel, what was it like coming to a new place and adapting and kind of living here? So Connie is a girl, and Emmanuel into Canada possibly. And what are the kind of things that we don't think about, that people that you have to think about when you're kind of moving to a new place and adapting?
I was really fortunate to come here when I was very, very, very young. But I do have memories which my mom actually verifies and says, yeah, this did happen. I grew up listening to shellings and bombs dropping outside my compound. But in my head, I had a beautiful childhood where I was safe. And even when certain shellings were going up, an auntie would jump on me to protect me. So I never had this notion of war, explicit war. And I think most people believe that when refugees are given asylum, that all of these issues go away, and that all of a sudden you become this English speaking, really welcomed member of society. And we know that's not what happens, you know, let alone the color of your skin and other prejudices that you can face. There's usually language barriers. And again, I was very young, so I had the opportunity to start off really, really early in my schooling, where I actually learned English, and I learned English quite well. So, but it doesn't, I saw snow in this country for the first time in Scotland. So there was a lot of first experiences for me, things that I never experienced in Africa, I never experienced in Kenya. I have very vague memories of in South Sudan that I experienced in this country. It's not easy, and I know I probably had it easy compared to most refugees because I came here so young, so quote unquote, I was assimilated into the British culture. But yeah, I definitely had my challenges. I was different, I stood out. I had to learn the language from scratch. We were extremely, extremely poor when we arrived here, 5 children. We had to, my parents, especially credit to them, they came here with absolutely nothing but the skills that they had. And they had to find a way to make it work for us. They had to find a way to raise all 5 of us. So it's not easy with some of the prejudices that my dad faced and my mother faced, let alone my older brothers and sisters. So I want people to be mindful as well. Just because you are granted asylum, it doesn't mean that life is rosy all of a sudden. You know, we still have a responsibility to know that there are barriers that are really, really prevalent in everyday society. And one of them we're talking about right now, which is Black Lives Matter. There are many obstacles and barriers. So we just have to be mindful of that.
Thank you. Tanya?
Yeah, well, I think Emmanuel has always said, and if you read his book, really it was when he reached a place of safety that the flashbacks used to come at night and the nightmares. When he was in that survival state, you just got through the day. But when he was in a place of safety, surrounded by other kids and normality, that's when he found it the hardest to adjust. And even now, I can sense that from him. If things are going really, really well, he doesn't trust that. Connie's laughing because, you know, and often when people have been through these really traumatic experiences, it doesn't come out the way you expect. Emmanuel's not going to suddenly break down and cry to me and say, oh my gosh, I lost.
I will pay to see that moment. I honestly will.
That's not how trauma comes out. It comes out in really odd, strange ways of behaving. So Emmanuel, like, this is Emmanuel's analogy, but he'll say, it's like he's sitting on a train and it's going in the right direction and everything's calm and it's fine, but there's this itch inside of him to open the door and throw himself off the train. I'm not talking about suicide, but just to do something completely random that jeopardizes everything, because he can operate in chaos. That's where he operates. That's where he feels safe. And it's when things are often going really, really well and really smoothly and an amazing opportunity comes along, that's when the barriers can come down. So, I mean, I know it might seem quite a dramatic way of how people adapt, but I think it's often when you meet people that have been through those experiences, it's not how you often think. You know, it's not, you're expecting them to perhaps behave or talk about certain things. And it's often completely the opposite, which makes my life interesting. And Connie, so
Thank you. I was just kind of wondering, like you talked about when you arrived in this country and you saw snow for the first time in Scotland. I was just wondering, like, as you know, such a young girl, such a young age at 7 years old, what were your first expectations of moving to England? Like, what did you imagine this place would be like?
Honestly, I thought I'd never have to eat certain native food. Like, there's native foods that I really hate. There's one thing specifically in South Sudan called asida, which is like maize that they pound and they make this flour and hot water and then you eat it with stews and soups. I was like, yes, I'm going to England. I never have to eat that ever again. I was really looking forward to eating hot dogs. And my dad actually kept that promise. When we landed here, one of the first things he did get me was a hot dog. And there's a joke in my family that I ate about 5. So I was quite chubby growing up. I just got ice cream, you name it. So everything I probably heard about or saw on TV. I was just excited to be a tourist, to be a foreigner, and to leave certain things behind as a silly kid that thought England was the land of ice cream and hot dogs. There was a lot of firsts for me, a lot. But at the same time, it was an interesting experience to see all of the different people, the skin, the colors, the nations. England was diverse. It wasn't a land of just white people. You know, it was a very multicultural place, and it was just, yeah, it's very, very, very different from a hot, sunny climate where there's occasional shellings happening to flats.
Thank you so much.
I think we'll probably have to wrap up there, but thank you so much to Tanya and Connie, Miss Whittington as well, and Emmanuel, who's not here today, but thank you for everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Next week.